Full story translated into English. In the mansion, everyone thought Bruno had lost his sight. His fiancée believed she had everything under control. His mother cried alone in the corridors. But what no one knew was that behind those dark glasses were two wide-open eyes, recording every single detail of the cruelty happening inside his own home. She humiliated him and his mother in front of the staff. She hid the food plate, locked the room, and smiled because she thought he couldn't see anything. But Bruno could see. Bruno always saw. And he waited, planned, and prepared every move with such precision that when she stepped into the trap, she didn't even have time to feel proper regret. Let's continue this story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments your name and the city you're watching from. Bruno Cavalcanti was not the type of man who appeared in magazines by chance. Every interview, every photograph, every public appearance was calculated with the same precision he applied to business. By the age of 38, he had built one of the largest business groups in Brazil's agro-industrial sector, with companies spread across 4 states, international contracts, and a name that opened doors before he even entered the room. But what the magazines never showed was his origin. Bruno grew up in the interior of Mato Grosso, the son of a simple woman named Marcella who washed clothes for others, sold whatever she could on the roadside, and still found a way to smile at the end of the day. She never asked for anything, never complained. She just worked and raised her son with what she had, giving him something no money can buy. Character. The millionaire never forgot it. When his company started growing, the first thing Bruno did was take his mother out of the tiny rented room where she lived and bring her to live with him. He prepared a special room for her in the east wing of the mansion, with a veranda, her own garden, and everything she had never had. He hired a nurse for the days he was away on business, called her every single day without exception, drove her to the doctor himself, held her hand during appointments, and laughed at the old stories she told for the 10th time as if he were hearing them for the first time. The mansion staff knew that touching Dona Marcella meant touching Bruno himself, and no one dared. At least, that's what everyone thought. Juliana Fons entered the millionaire's life 2 years earlier, one evening at a reception in São Paulo. Tall, elegant, with a smile so perfectly rehearsed it could disarm any man. She worked as an image consultant for top executives and knew exactly how to behave in any situation. With Bruno, she was patient, never rushed, let him come to her, let him believe he had chosen her, let him believe he had found someone special. And Bruno, who was cold to the entire world, allowed himself to believe. 8 months later, she was already living in the mansion. 12 months later, a ring was on her finger. The wedding was set for March. At first, Marcella tried to love her sincerely. She tried with all her heart. But there was something in Juliana's manners that made her uncomfortable. The smile that never reached her eyes, the kindness that lasted exactly as long as Bruno was in the room, the patience that vanished the moment the door closed. Marcella said nothing to her son. She didn't want to seem jealous, didn't want to seem like she didn't want to share him, so she kept that strange feeling to herself and kept trying. It happened one Monday afternoon when Bruno returned earlier than expected from a meeting. He entered through the side door of the mansion without warning and heard voices in the kitchen. He froze in the hallway, not announcing himself. The voice sounded different, dry, sharp. Then he heard Marcella's voice, quiet, almost a whisper, saying she just wanted a glass of water. Juliana's reply was quick and cold. "Carla will bring it." "I'm not your servant." Bruno stood frozen. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't an argument. It was worse. It was the tone of someone who no longer even bothers to hide their contempt. He walked into the kitchen with his usual step, greeted both women as if he had heard nothing, went to the refrigerator, poured the glass of water his mother had asked for, handed it to her with his usual care, touched her shoulder and asked how she was feeling. Marcella smiled that tired smile of someone carrying too much inside. Juliana watched the scene with a flawless smile on her face. The millionaire smiled back at her, but inside something had changed. In the following weeks, he began to notice the small details that had previously gone unnoticed and now took on new meaning. Marcella's plate always arrived last at dinner. Her room was ventilated less often. The nurse Bruno had hired was reassigned by Juliana to other duties without his knowledge. And Marcella remained silent. Then Bruno made the most important decision of his life outside of business. He was not going to confront Juliana. He was not going to ask her anything. He was not going to argue. He was not going to reveal his feelings. He was going to do what he always did when he needed to truly understand a situation before acting. Observe. But to observe properly, he needed something she would never expect. He needed her to believe with absolute certainty that he could see nothing. And that was how the plan began to take shape. Bruno was not an impulsive man. Never had been. In business, he had one rule he repeated to all his partners. Before moving a piece, make sure you know exactly where every piece is on the board. With that same approach, he began to build what would become the most personal and most dangerous plan of his life. The idea came to him in the middle of the night while he lay in bed and Juliana slept beside him. He spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying every scene he had witnessed in recent weeks. The tone of voice in the kitchen, the late plates, the reassigned nurse, and the mother who kept smiling, keeping everything inside, protecting him from the pain that was already there. Marcella had always done that her whole life. When he was a child and there wasn't enough food, she said she wasn't hungry so his plate would be full. When he needed money for his first business trip, she pawned the only piece of jewelry she owned, a pair of gold earrings that had belonged to her mother, and never told him until years later. Marcella had never put her own suffering above her son's well-being. And now she was the one suffering in the house he had built. The millionaire felt something he rarely felt. It wasn't anger. It was a mixture of pain and determination that slowly settled in his chest and turned into fuel. He wasn't going to explode. He was going to use it. The next morning Bruno woke up early, before Juliana, and went to the room of the only person in the mansion he truly trusted. Rodrigo, his driver and right-hand man for 12 years. Rodrigo had once collected cardboard before Bruno came into his life. He had grown up in even worse conditions than Bruno, and that was why there was a loyalty between them that needed no explanation. Bruno closed the door, sat down opposite him and went straight to the point, as always. I need to stage an accident. I need everyone to believe I'm blind. And I need you to be the only person in the world who knows it's not true. Rodrigo was silent for a few seconds, then asked only one question. Is it for Dona Marcella? Bruno nodded. Rodrigo didn't need to hear anything else. The plan was built with surgical precision. Bruno chose the main company facility in the interior of Montegrosso as the setting. It was a place where real accidents had happened before, which made everything more believable. The idea was to simulate a fall during an inspection of the main hangar, with a blow to the head that would justify serious eye damage. Rodrigo organized everything behind the scenes. He hired a trusted doctor outside Juliana's circle to confirm the clinical picture. The diagnosis spoke of bilateral retinal detachment caused by the impact, with an uncertain prognosis for recovery, serious enough to be taken seriously and ambiguous enough not to raise suspicions later. Juliana was called by phone while she was in São Paulo. Rodrigo's voice trembled exactly as it should. She arrived at the company 3 hours later with an expression of despair that anyone would have considered genuine, anyone except Bruno, because he was already there, wearing dark glasses, lying on a bed in the company infirmary, pretending to be disoriented. And he saw the expression on her face when she entered the room. It wasn't despair. It was calculation. Her eyes scanned the room, windows, equipment, staff in the corridor, and only after evaluating everything did she approach, take his hand and say in a trembling voice, "Darling, I'm here. Don't worry about anything." Bruno squeezed her hand and said, "Thank you." Inside, he recorded everything. In the following days, the farce solidified. Bruno returned to the mansion in São Paulo guided by Rodrigo's arm, with a cane, answering people with a slight delay as if orienting himself by sound. Juliana took on the role of devoted fiancée with a naturalness that would have been impressive in other circumstances. She organized his schedule, chose his clothes, led him from room to room, answered calls when he couldn't find the phone. To the outside world, she was the perfect image of a partner supporting her man through a crisis. But Bruno was paying attention to something else. From the moment the act began, she had even fewer reasons to hide what she felt toward Marcella. The blind fiancé couldn't see, the staff was discreet, she controlled the house, and that was exactly what he began to observe. In the first days, the dynamic changed quickly. Marcella appeared less in the common areas. Food began to be served in her room under the pretext that it was more comfortable. The garden Bruno had built for his mother remained locked most of the time because Juliana had the key. One afternoon Bruno was sitting in the living room, pretending to listen to an audiobook, when he heard hurried footsteps in the corridor and then Juliana's low, harsh voice. "Marcella, I already told you that you shouldn't walk around the house disturbing Bruno's recovery." Marcella replied with such a quiet sorry that it hurt. Bruno remained motionless on the sofa. The dark glasses hid his wide-open eyes. She still hadn't seen what he was capable of. There is one thing most people don't understand about pretending to have a limitation. When you remove one sense, the others sharpen. Not literally, but perception changes. You start noticing things that used to go unnoticed because your eyes no longer take all the focus. Bruno discovered this in practice. With dark glasses and a cane, he became invisible as never before. People around him lowered their guard, spoke louder, discussed things they would never have discussed in front of the owner of the house. And Juliana, always calculating, also made mistakes. Not immediately, but gradually, like a mask that loosens in the heat. And the heat was rising. 10 days had passed since Bruno began pretending to be blind when the first scene occurred that he would never be able to erase from his memory. It was around 6 in the evening. He was sitting in his office in the leather armchair, the audiobook playing softly as part of the performance. The door was ajar. Then he heard footsteps in the corridor, 2 sets, one confident and one hesitant. Juliana's voice came first. "Marcella, I already told you the doctor prescribed silence. There's no need to come to this wing every hour." Marcella's voice followed, quiet, with the delicacy of someone who had spent her whole life learning not to disturb. "I just wanted to leave the broth here by the door. I made it myself. He's always loved it." There was a pause. Bruno stopped breathing. "I'll take care of it," Juliana said. "You can go." Another pause. But I could just Juliana's voice dropped even lower and became colder. "I said I'll take care of it. Bruno needs rest, not visits. Go to your room, please." The sound of Marcella's footsteps walking away was the heaviest sound Bruno had heard in a long time. Slow steps, the steps of someone who obeys not because she wants to, but because she has learned that insisting comes at a high price. Bruno remained motionless in the armchair until he was sure the corridor was empty. Then he took off his glasses for a few seconds, rubbed his face with both hands and took a deep breath. The broth Marcella had prepared was behind the door. He slowly stood up, put the glasses back on, carefully opened the door and took the container. It was still warm. His mother had made it with love, as always, and hadn't even been able to hand it to him. Bruno returned to the armchair with the container in his hands and sat in silence, feeling the warmth pass from the ceramic to his palms. At that moment the plan stopped being something vague and became a concrete decision. But he needed more. He needed proof. He needed to see, not just hear. For that he needed something Juliana could not control. That same evening, when she went out to dinner with friends, Bruno called Rodrigo and asked for a simple thing. Small discrete cameras installed in the corridors, the kitchen, the living room and the area near Marcella's room. Nothing illegal. They were domestic surveillance cameras and the mansion already had a monitoring system. They only needed to expand the coverage and direct access exclusively to Bruno's phone. Rodrigo installed them in less than 2 hours. And then Bruno had eyes in every corner of his own house. What he saw in the following days would have made any person lose their composure. But Bruno was not any person. The next morning, the cameras caught Juliana in the kitchen giving instructions to the chef. The conversation seemed normal until she pointed to a dish and said with complete casualness, "This is for Bruno's lunch. For Dona Marcella serve whatever is left." The chef froze for a second, then lowered her head and answered, "Yes, That same day, after lunch, one of the corridor cameras recorded Juliana opening Marcella's room without knocking, entering, looking around as if inspecting a storeroom, and leaving without saying a word, taking with her the floral arrangement Bruno had ordered placed there for his mother. That evening, the arrangement was in the main living room. Bruno watched everything on his phone while Juliana slept beside him. She breathed calmly, like someone with a clear conscience or simply someone to whom none of it mattered. The scene that became the turning point happened on Thursday. Bruno was on the veranda, pretending to sunbathe with dark glasses on, when Juliana received a call and stepped out into the side garden, thinking she was far enough away. The exterior camera recorded everything. He watched it on his phone with one earpiece in. The call was to someone she called darling and it clearly wasn't Bruno. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. He heard laughter, heard plans, heard her say with terrifying lightness that the blindness situation was actually convenient because it gave her more freedom. And he heard her arrange a meeting the following week in an apartment whose existence Bruno didn't even know about. When the call ended, Juliana returned to the mansion with her usual smile, approached him, gently kissed his forehead and asked if he wanted anything. The millionaire smiled and said no, that everything was fine. But inside that cold and strategic head, the last pieces on the board had just fallen into place. Bruno always said that the difference between an ordinary person and a strategist is not intelligence, but patience. Any smart person can see a problem, but only a few are capable of sitting on their anger, taking a deep breath and waiting for the exact moment to act. He had trained that patience since he was 22, when he lost his first major contract because he acted too hastily. At that time, a competitor had stolen information from his project and presented the proposal before him. Bruno was so furious that he confronted the man immediately, without sufficient evidence, without strategy, without anything. He lost not only the contract but also the reputation he had been trying to build. That defeat was imprinted on him like an invisible tattoo. Never again. Now, 16 years later, he sat in his office with the phone in his hand, watching through the cameras the daily life of his own house and applying everything he had learned. Every recorded scene was proof. Every proof was a piece. And every piece was placed with the neatness of someone assembling a puzzle and knowing exactly what the final picture would look like. The millionaire created an encrypted folder on his phone and began saving all the videos. He organized the patterns by date, built a timeline. He had the instinct of an entrepreneur and the cold blood of an investigator. He used both at the same time. But there was one thing that had to be resolved before any external action. It was impossible to build an effective plan while his mother continued to endure such treatment in her own home. Every day that passed was another day of silent humiliation, and Bruno knew Marcella would say nothing. She never would. She was that kind of woman who swallows suffering so as not to worry those she loves. So he had to act from the inside out. Protect his mother without revealing that he could see. Create situations that would restore at least some dignity to Marcella without Juliana noticing the opposing force. The first move was discreet. Bruno asked Rodrigo to call Carla, the nurse whom Juliana had reassigned. He did it on a day when the fiancée was not at home. Rodrigo brought Carla to the office. She entered not fully understanding what was happening and was surprised when Bruno spoke to her looking exactly where she stood, with a precision a blind man could never achieve. He explained nothing. He only said what was necessary. You are returning to take care of Dona Marcella starting tomorrow. If anyone tries to change that, you come and speak directly to me. You can knock on the door of this office at any time. Carla opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded with moist eyes. She truly loved Marcella. It had hurt her when she was removed from those duties. Carla, he added before she left, this stays between us. She left without another word. The next day, when Juliana noticed that Carla had returned to Marcella's room, she went to Bruno with a ready explanation on the tip of her tongue, saying she had organized everything thinking of his well-being, that Carla was needed in other parts of the house. Bruno listened patiently, waited for her to finish and said in a calm and final voice, I asked her to return. My mother needs care. I don't want to discuss it. Juliana was silent for 2 seconds, then smiled and said that was fine, that he was right. It was the smile of someone who yields in one battle but does not abandon the war. Bruno mentally recorded that smile. Meanwhile, outside the mansion another move was being prepared. The millionaire had a trusted lawyer named Enrique who had worked with him for 9 years and was silent as stone. Bruno contacted him through a channel Juliana did not know, an old number he had never disconnected, and requested a private meeting at the company office under the pretext of a doctor's visit. Rodrigo drove him there. In a closed office, Bruno removed his glasses, sat opposite Enrique and went straight to the point, as always. I need you to investigate the apartment Juliana maintains without my knowledge. Address, lease contract, who pays, who visits. I also need a complete analysis of her assets before our relationship and what she has accumulated during it. And I need to know if her name appears in any business partnership I don't know about. Enrique wrote everything down without blinking. Deadline: 3 weeks. The wedding. Bruno put his glasses back on before answering. The wedding will take place as planned until I say otherwise. Enrique knew Bruno well enough to ask nothing more. Back at the mansion, outwardly everything continued as before. Juliana cared for her blind fiancé with that show of devotion. Marcella tried to take up as little space as possible. The staff moved silently. And Bruno, in the middle of it all, with dark glasses and cane in hand, was building inside himself what would be the greatest blow of his life. 3 weeks remained until the wedding and the board was almost ready. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and hit like. At the end of this video, I want you to answer the question. If your mother were in a situation like this, what would you do? Would you act like Bruno? Leave your comment. 18 days remained until the wedding when Enrique's report was ready. Rodrigo personally collected the envelope from the lawyer's office, brought it to the mansion in the inside pocket of his jacket and handed it to Bruno during one of the supposed physiotherapy sessions, which in practice was the only moment of the day when the millionaire was completely out of Juliana's field of vision. They stopped the car in a closed parking lot far from traffic. Bruno opened the envelope right there in the back seat. It took him 20 minutes to read everything. When he finished, he slowly folded the sheets, put them back in the envelope and stared out the car window for a long time without saying anything. Rodrigo sat silently in the front seat, respecting the moment as he always did. "She's a partner," Bruno finally said in a low, restrained voice. "Of whom?" asked Rodrigo. "Of my main competitor." The silence that followed was heavy enough to fill the entire car. Enrique's report showed that Juliana Fons owned 32% of a holding that controlled 13 companies in the agribusiness sector, all direct competitors of Bruno's group. The partnership had been formalized 7 months earlier, exactly in the period when she began to visit the mansion more often, right after gaining access to his private office. The man she had spoken to on the phone in the garden was not just her lover. He was a business partner and his name was FBIO, an entrepreneur in the same industry whom Bruno knew superficially and had always considered too mediocre to pose a real threat. He had underestimated FBIO. And he had underestimated Juliana. She was not in his life for love or simple personal ambition. She was on a mission. She had been brought close to him so she could win his trust, gain access to strategic information and probably secure privileged benefits after the wedding, when joint property laws would come into effect. It was a cold and calculated plan, executed with patience and precision. Bruno looked at the envelope in his hands and thought, with strange clarity, that he had to admit the plan was good. She was competent. In other circumstances he might even have felt respect. But she had made a mistake that no clever plan could compensate for. She had hurt Marcella. And that changed everything. The millionaire returned to the mansion that day with his usual expression. He let Rodrigo guide him through the entrance, followed the familiar route to the living room, sat on the sofa and stayed there while Juliana brought him a juice he hadn't asked for and asked how the session had gone with an interest that now sounded like a poorly rehearsed performance. "Tired," he replied, "but the doctor says there's progress." She smiled and said that was wonderful news. Bruno nodded. That night, after Juliana fell asleep, he lay awake, mapping out the next steps. The original plan had been simpler. A public revelation on the wedding day that would expose everything in front of the right people. But with the new information that was no longer enough. Legal aspects had to be involved, assets protected, the company secured before either Juliana or FBIO could cause real damage. He called Enrique at 11 o'clock at night. The lawyer answered on the second ring, as if he had been waiting for the call. "Contact our corporate legal department first thing tomorrow morning," Bruno said quietly. "I want a full audit of all contracts signed in the last 2 years, any documents she might have had access to, any information that might have leaked. I want it completed before the wedding." "Understood. Anything else?" "Start preparing the documents to dissolve the engagement with full asset protection, but don't register anything yet. Just prepare." Enrique said everything would be ready in 48 hours. Bruno hung up and lay in the darkness with his eyes open. Then he heard it. First soft footsteps in the corridor, then a muffled, irritated voice he immediately recognized. It was Juliana. And a second, quieter voice. "Marcella." He slowly got up, walked to the bedroom door and pressed his ear against it. Juliana was in the corridor with Marcella, and the tone of her voice was different from anything Bruno had heard before. It was no longer the calculated coldness of someone in control. It was crude, almost uncontrollable impatience. Marcella had left her room in the middle of the night to get a headache pill and Juliana had woken up from a noise. "You can't even stay quiet at night," she hissed through her teeth. "Always getting in the way, always appearing where you're not wanted." "I just needed the medicine." "I'll go right back," Marcella replied in a trembling voice. "Go to your room." "I'll tell Carla to bring it." "Go to your room, Marcella." Bruno heard his mother's footsteps moving away, heard her bedroom door close, heard Juliana return to the bedroom and lie down as if nothing had happened. He stood in the darkness of his own room, heart beating in a rhythm he rarely felt, thinking only one thing. How much more had Marcella endured that he had not yet seen? 11 days remained until the wedding when Bruno noticed that Juliana was changing. It wasn't a sudden change. It was the kind of transformation that happens when a person starts feeling too confident, when they believe the ground beneath their feet is so solid that they can stop treading so carefully. The smiles became rarer, the tone of voice drier, and the patience that had always been her main tool began to show deep cracks. Bruno observed everything in silence. 2 days earlier, the cameras had already recorded Juliana ordering Marcella to stay in her room all day, not to leave, without television, without anything. She had hung a padlock on the door grill with a coldness that would chill the blood of anyone who dared to see it. Bruno saw it. He stood in his office gripping the phone so tightly that marks remained on his palm. Rodrigo removed the padlock the same day at Bruno's request so Juliana wouldn't notice. The message was clear. She was escalating, going further than he had anticipated, and the millionaire understood that the situation was approaching a point of no return. It was precisely on a Friday morning that everything exploded in a way that, despite all his ability to anticipate moves, Bruno could not fully predict. Carla had left early for the pharmacy. Rodrigo was in the garage servicing the car. The rest of the staff were in the outer areas of the mansion. Bruno was walking down the corridor leading to the east wing, slowly, with his cane, following the route he had already memorized with millimeter precision. Then he stopped. He heard voices coming from the kitchen and then a sound he couldn't immediately identify. A heavy metallic sound that had nothing to do with the normal routine of that room. He stood in the corridor for 2 seconds, reached the kitchen entrance, stopped at the threshold and saw. Marcella was sitting on a chair in the middle of the kitchen, wrapped in a thick chain around her hands and torso. A white cloth was tied over her mouth, muffling any sound she tried to make. Her eyes were open, moist, with the expression of someone who no longer knows whether she feels more fear or shame. Juliana stood in front of her in a red dress, dark hair loose, with a smile on her face that had nothing human about it. She had leaned over Marcella, hands on her shoulders, as if posing for a photograph only she could see. In that smile there was pleasure, the most horrible pleasure Bruno had ever seen in his life. She enjoyed it. It wasn't uncontrolled rage. It wasn't a moment of breakdown. It was calculated pleasure created from cruelty. Bruno stood motionless on the threshold in his dark glasses. Juliana had not heard him approach. She stood with her back to the entrance, completely absorbed in her own malice, whispering something to Marcella that he couldn't fully hear, but which filled his mother's eyes with tears. He remained still, the perfect image of a disoriented blind man who didn't know exactly where he was, cane in hand and slightly uncertain posture. The dark glasses hid everything. He was the most awake person on earth at that moment. Every detail was imprinted on his eyes as if filmed in slow motion. The chain, the cloth, Juliana's smile, Marcella's tears, the morning light streaming through the kitchen window and illuminating that absurd scene as if the world had no idea what was happening inside. Juliana turned at that moment, probably by instinct, and saw his silhouette in the doorway. For a fraction of a second the smile froze, but it returned immediately, too quickly. "Darling," she said, switching from cruelty to tenderness in less than a second with astonishing speed. "Did you leave the room alone? You could have called me. I'll help you." She crossed the kitchen, approached him, touched his arm with her usual familiarity and began leading him back down the corridor. "There's a mess in the kitchen right now. Better wait in the living room while I prepare the coffee." Bruno let himself be led. He said nothing. He walked down the corridor, sat on the living room sofa, accepted the glass of water she brought 30 seconds later and answered with a calm smile when she asked if everything was all right. "Everything's fine," he said. "I just came for a glass of water." Juliana said she would ask Carla to bring coffee soon, gave him a gentle kiss on the forehead and returned to the kitchen. Bruno remained sitting on the sofa with the glass of water in his hand. The dark glasses hid eyes that were dry, open, and absolutely cold. He had seen everything. Every chain, every tear, every one of her smiles. And he made the final decision of his life. Juliana would not simply lose the wedding. She would not simply lose money. She would not simply lose her reputation. She would lose everything she had built using his name, and she would lose it in front of everyone. Bruno spent the rest of that day in silence. Not the silence of a shocked man, but the silence of someone calculating, of someone taking every available piece on the board and beginning to move them with the precision that comes only after many years of making decisions whose mistakes are costly. That night, after Juliana fell asleep, he went to Marcella's room. He knocked softly twice with his knuckles, as he had always done since she moved in with him. He heard the creak of the mattress and the small footsteps approaching. The door opened slowly and Marcella appeared in the blue robe he had given her for her birthday, her white hair loose and her eyes still carrying the weight of what had happened that morning. When she saw her son, she opened her mouth to speak. He gently placed a finger to his lips, entered the room noiselessly, closed the door and only then removed his dark glasses. Marcella looked into his eyes for a few seconds without understanding. Then she understood. Because a mother always understands. And her eyes filled with tears so quickly that his heart broke in two. "You can see," she whispered. "I always could," he replied. She opened her mouth to say something and couldn't. She simply placed her hand on her son's face with the familiar tenderness, that small, hard-working hand he had known since childhood. And so they remained for a moment that neither of them needed to put into words. Bruno took her hand. "I saw everything, Mom. Everything." Marcella closed her eyes and a tear slowly rolled down her face. "I didn't want to worry you," she said. "I know," he answered. "That's why you are the best person I know. And that's precisely why what was done to you will not go unanswered." She opened her eyes and looked at him with that mixture of love and concern that only a mother has. "Bruno, don't do anything that will harm you. It's not worth it." He smiled a calm smile, without visible anger but with a determination Marcella recognized instantly, because it was the same smile that appeared on him in his early 20s when he decided to achieve something everyone considered impossible. "It won't harm me, Mom. You can trust me." He stayed with her for another half hour. They spoke quietly. He assured her that Carla would stay with her in the coming days and that no one else would enter that room without his permission. Before leaving, he put the glasses back on, looked at her one last time and said, "It won't be long now." Marcella nodded and, for the first time in several weeks, her smile truly reached her eyes. The next day, Bruno launched the final phase of the plan. He called Enrique early in the morning and confirmed that all the documents were ready. The contract audit was complete. There was concrete evidence that strategic company information had been leaked to Juliana and FBIO's holding. It was not just personal betrayal. It was a crime. Enrique already had a criminal lawyer prepared. The second move was a call to Eduardo Vasconcelos, Brazil's leading business journalist, with whom Bruno had a relationship of mutual respect built over many years. He revealed no details. He simply said he had a story Eduardo would not want to miss and that the right moment to publish it would come in less than a week. Eduardo said he would be on standby. The third move was the most delicate. Bruno convened a meeting with the main wedding guests under the pretext of a thank you dinner for their presence and support during his vision recovery. He invited business partners, investors, a few close friends and relatives. The chosen date was the eve of the wedding, in the banquet hall of the hotel where the ceremony was to take place. Juliana was delighted with the idea. "How beautiful, darling," she said when he told her. "It will be perfect." He agreed. She began organizing the details with the enthusiasm of someone who believes she is at the top. She chose the menu, approved the decoration, sent invitations to the guests with the elegance that confirmed why she was so good at her job. She was an image professional. She knew exactly how to build a narrative. The problem was that this time the narrative belonged to Bruno. While Juliana organized the dinner she thought would be a celebration, Bruno prepared every detail of what that evening would actually become. Rodrigo coordinated the technical part. Enrique handled the legal side. Eduardo Vasconcelos would be notified at the right moment to be present or have access to what would happen. And the cameras, those small discrete cameras Rodrigo had installed throughout the mansion, contained enough material to destroy any version of the story Juliana might try to tell afterward. 6 days remained. The millionaire sat on the mansion veranda on a warm day, dark glasses on, cane leaning against the chair. Juliana came out and sat beside him with 2 glasses of juice. "Happy?" she asked with a flawless smile. Bruno turned his face toward her as if looking at her and answered with absolute calm like never before. "More than you can imagine." She clinked her glass against his with carefree lightness, never suspecting for a second that she was toasting with the man who had calculated detail by detail her own destruction. The hotel banquet hall was impeccable. Round tables with white tablecloths, elegant floral arrangements, golden lighting that gave the room an atmosphere of refined celebration. About 80 guests moved around the hall, glasses in hand, lively conversations, that special buzz of an event where all the important people are gathered in one place. Juliana shone in a dark blue dress with her hair up and a few loose strands framing her face. Perfect makeup. She moved through the hall with the naturalness of someone born for such events, greeting each guest with the right name, the right remark, the right smile. Watching her was impressive. A flawless performance without a single visible flaw. Bruno sat at the head table in a dark suit and dark glasses, Rodrigo discreetly positioned nearby. Marcella sat to his right in a light blue dress he had specially ordered for that evening, her white hair neatly styled and a simple necklace around her neck that had belonged to her own mother. She looked beautiful and nervous, because Bruno had told her enough for her to understand that this evening was not what it seemed. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, without turning his head, maintaining the blind posture he still had to keep for a few more hours. "Yes," Marcella replied in the same tone. "I just want everything to end well." "It will end well," he said. "Stay calm and don't be surprised by anything that happens." She touched his hand under the table. At 9 o'clock the host asked for attention and announced that the host of the evening wished to say a few words. Rodrigo led Bruno to the center of the hall where the microphone was set up. The millionaire stood there with the cane in his hand and dark glasses on. The entire hall fell silent with that mixture of respect and curiosity that always accompanies a powerful man in a vulnerable position. Juliana stood near the head table with her smile ready, prepared to be moved as the devoted bride the moment required. Bruno began to speak. "I want to thank everyone who came. You are important people in my life, in my business, in my story. And that is precisely why I chose you to be here this evening. Because what I want to say it in front of those who truly matter." Pause. The hall became completely quiet. In the last month I have lived one of the most revealing experiences of my life. Losing your sight, even temporarily, changes the way you look at the world. Some guests exchanged emotional glances. Juliana tilted her head slightly with the expression of a faithful companion. "When you cannot see," Bruno continued, "people show who they really are, because they think you are not looking. And that is when the truth appears. Without filters, without makeup, without performing for the audience." Something in the tone of his voice changed slightly on the last phrase. Juliana blinked. "That is why, first of all, I want to speak about the most important person in my life." He turned his face toward the head table and, with a precision a blind man would never have had, looked directly at Marcella. "My mother." Marcella pressed her lips together to keep from crying. "This woman washed clothes for others to raise me. She sold the only piece of jewelry she owned to give me a chance. She never asked for anything, never complained, never put her own suffering above mine. Everything I have built, every company, every contract, every achievement carries her hand. I will not allow anyone, absolutely anyone, to treat her as if she were worth nothing." The hall grew heavy. Juliana was no longer smiling. Bruno removed his dark glasses. The gesture was slow and deliberate. And the silence that followed was the kind of silence that occurs when 80 people simultaneously understand that they are witnessing something far greater than they expected. He looked straight at Juliana and said in a calm voice that echoed throughout the hall, "I was never blind. Not for a single day. Not for a single second." The murmur began low and quickly grew. People looked at each other. Some opened their mouths. Juliana involuntarily took a step back as if the floor had shifted beneath her feet. Bruno continued. "I pretended to be blind to see what can only be seen when people think you are not looking. I saw many things, Juliana. I saw how you treated my mother when you thought I could not see. I saw the apartment you maintained at my expense without my knowledge. I saw the partnership you had with FBIO, my direct competitor." Each word fell into the hall like a stone on a glass surface. Rodrigo stood up beside a screen that had been discreetly installed at the back of the hall. The images began to appear. Footage from the internal cameras. Juliana's voice in the corridor. The phone conversation in the garden. And finally the scene in the kitchen. Marcella tied to the chair, the chain, Juliana's smile. The hall exploded in reactions. Juliana opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. For the first time since Bruno had known her, she had no words. No smile. No performance. only the look of someone who realizes too late that she had completely underestimated the man standing before her. Bruno put the glasses in his jacket pocket and pronounced the last sentence of the evening with absolute calm. "The wedding is cancelled, and our lawyer will contact yours this week." Then he turned his back on her, walked without the cane to the table, sat down next to Marcella and took her hand. The millionaire had made the final move. The morning after the dinner was different. In the mansion there was nothing unusual in the sky, in the wind, in the temperature. It was an ordinary morning in São Paulo with that white late summer light that enters through the windows uninvited. But inside that house the air was different. Lighter, as if the walls had released something heavy they had been carrying for a long time. Juliana had left the night before without saying a word. She took her bag, crossed the entire hall under the gaze of 80 pairs of eyes that followed every step and disappeared through the door. There was no scene. There were no shouts. Only the sound of her heels on the marble floor and then silence. It was the most fitting end for someone who had built everything on appearances. She left exactly as she had arrived, without any substance. Bruno woke up early, as always. He went to the kitchen, made coffee with his own hands, placed on a tray bread, butter, and that guava jam that Marcella had loved since he was a child and which he ordered specially from a little shop in the interior for her. He went up to her room, knocked twice gently and waited. The door opened and Marcella appeared still in the blue robe, her white hair loose and her eyes rested, the eyes of someone who for the first time in a long time had truly slept well. She looked at the tray, looked at her son and, unable to contain herself, began to cry. It wasn't a cry of pain. It was the cry with which one releases a burden one has carried in silence for too long. Bruno set the tray on the small table, embraced her with the kind of embrace only a son can give his mother, and they remained like that for a long time, needing no words. When she wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her robe and said in a still trembling voice, "You embarrass me so much there in front of everyone, you know." Bruno frowned, not understanding. "Embarrassed you? Why? Because I cried like a child in front of everyone when they spoke about you?" He laughed with a sincere laugh, the kind that rises from the chest without warning. And Marcella laughed with him. And for a moment the kitchen of the millionaire's mansion was filled with the simplest and most valuable thing in the world. Two people who truly love each other laughing together. In the following weeks justice was served with the same precision with which Bruno had built his plan. Enrique filed the lawsuits within the agreed deadlines. The evidence of corporate espionage was presented to the competent authorities. FBIO was charged with unfair competition and misuse of confidential information. The holding he and Juliana jointly managed became the subject of an investigation that quickly revealed other irregularities, and 3 junior partners of the company hurried to reach agreements before the situation worsened further. Juliana was charged as an accomplice. The apartment she maintained was determined to have been partially paid with funds diverted from a joint account whose existence Bruno had not even known about, opened through an old power of attorney that she had used fraudulently. Another layer of the plan that had been built in cold blood and which now collapsed at the same speed. Eduardo Vasconcelos's report came out on Thursday in the digital edition of the country's largest business portal. The headline was direct. Millionaire pretended to be blind and exposed a corporate espionage scheme organized by his own fiancée. In less than 6 hours it became the most talked about topic on social media. In less than 24 hours the material was reprinted by dozens of national and several international outlets. Bruno Cavalcante's name returned to the pages of magazines, but this time not as the cold and calculating businessman everyone knew. He returned as the son who had risked everything to protect his mother. And that version the public had not known generated a wave of respect and admiration he himself had not expected. Messages arrived from everywhere. From partners, from clients, from strangers who had read the story and wanted to say they had been moved. Many spoke of their own mothers. Many said the story had made them call home that same day. Bruno read every message and saved them all. 3 months after the dinner that changed everything, he threw a party. It was not a business event. There were no strategic partners or investors. It was a small intimate celebration in a simple hall he rented in the very neighborhood where he had grown up, in the interior of Mato Grosso. There were old neighbors, childhood friends of his mother, Rodrigo with his family, Carla, Enrique, and a few people who had been part of their shared history long before any money appeared. In the middle of the party Bruno took the microphone without warning. He was not a man of long speeches. He said little. He said that in all those months he had understood that the greatest wealth a person can have does not fit in any financial report. That he had built an empire, but the only foundation that truly held everything up was a small woman with white hair who once pawned a pair of gold earrings to give her son a chance. Marcella sat in the front row in a flowered dress she had chosen herself, her eyes shining with that same light he had known since childhood. He stepped down from the stage, walked over to her, knelt in front of her and said softly, only for her, "You will never have to endure anything alone again. Never again." Marcella placed her hand on his face and smiled the smile Bruno had fought an entire month to give back to her. Complete, without weight, without fear, without anything hidden. Only love.